For years, the Syrian civil war has been a festering wound on the world stage, a brutal conflict marked by unimaginable suffering and geopolitical complexity. Now, with a sudden surge in rebel activity, the Assad regime, which has clung to power for over a decade, is teetering on the brink of collapse. The situation is incredibly fluid, a powder keg of competing interests and potential consequences. In this video, we're going to delve into the factors that have brought Syria to this critical juncture. We'll examine the resurgent rebel groups, the internal power struggles within the country, and the international actors vying for influence. We'll also explore the potential ramifications of Assad's fall, from a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions to a geopolitical earthquake that could reshape the entire region. This is a story of human drama, of power struggles, and of the often tragic consequences of international politics. It's a story that demands our attention because what happens in Syria will resonate far beyond its borders. Syria today is a patchwork of alliances and enmities, a battleground where a dizzying array of rebel groups are vying for control. These are not a monolithic force, but a collection of factions with often divergent goals and ideologies. One of the most prominent groups is the Free Syrian Army, or FSA, a loosely organized umbrella group composed primarily of defectors from Assad's military. The FSA initially garnered international support for its relatively secular stance and its stated goal of establishing a democratic Syria. However, the FSA has been weakened by internal divisions and a lack of consistent support from Western powers. Then there's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly affiliated with al-Qaeda, which controls a significant portion of the Idlib province. HTS has been designated a terrorist organization by many countries, including the United States, and its presence adds another layer of complexity to the conflict. And we can't forget the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, a Kurdish-led group that has been instrumental in the fight against ISIS. The SDF has carved out a semi-autonomous region in northeastern Syria, but its relationship with Turkey, which views the Kurdish YPG militia within the SDF as a terrorist organization, remains highly contentious. The resurgence of these rebel groups, each with their own agendas and backers, has put immense pressure on the Assad regime. Their renewed offensives, fueled by a complex web of alliances and rivalries, have exposed the fragility of Assad's grip on power and raised the very real possibility of his downfall. To understand the potential collapse of the Assad regime, we need to look beyond the battlefield and into the heart of the Syrian government itself. The country is riddled with internal divisions, a tapestry of competing interests and simmering resentment that has brought it to the precipice. One of the most significant factors is the role of foreign powers. Syria has become a proxy battleground for regional and global players, each seeking to advance their own strategic interests. Russia, for instance, has been a staunch ally of Assad, providing crucial military support that has been instrumental in his survival. Iran, too, has provided significant backing, deploying its own forces and supporting a network of Shia militias fighting alongside Assad's troops. On the other side of the equation, you have countries like Turkey, which has backed certain rebel groups and launched military incursions into northern Syria. The United States has also provided limited support to some rebel factions, though its involvement has been marked by inconsistency and a reluctance to become deeply entangled in the conflict. These external actors have not only fueled the conflict but also exacerbated internal divisions within Syria. The Assad regime, once seen as a relatively stable and secular force in the region, is now deeply fractured, weakened by corruption, infighting, and a growing sense that Assad himself is no longer in control. Chapter 3. The Crumbling Edifice. For years, Bashar al-Assad projected an image of strength and defiance, seemingly unmoved by the devastation engulfing his country. But behind the facade of control, the foundations of his regime have been slowly crumbling, eroded by years of war, corruption, and international pressure. The Syrian economy, once a source of pride for the Assad regime, lies in ruins. Years of conflict have decimated infrastructure, disrupted trade, and sent the value of the Syrian pound plummeting. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated these economic woes, pushing the country to the brink of collapse. Adding to the pressure is a crippling sanctions regime imposed by the United States and its allies. These sanctions, designed to cripple the Syrian economy and force Assad to the negotiating table, have had a devastating impact on ordinary Syrians, leading to widespread shortages of food, medicine, and other essential goods. Perhaps most damaging of all has been the erosion of support for Assad within Syria itself. The Alawite community, a Shia Muslim minority from which Assad hails, has long formed the backbone of his regime. But even within this core constituency, there are growing cracks, fueled by the war's devastating toll and the regime's increasing brutality. The combination of these factors, a shattered economy, crippling sanctions, and waning internal support, has left the Assad regime teetering on the brink. The recent surge in rebel activity may be the final push that topples this once seemingly unshakable edifice. Chapter 4. A looming humanitarian catastrophe. As we grapple with the potential collapse of the Assad regime, we cannot lose sight of the human cost of this protracted conflict. The Syrian people have endured unimaginable suffering, and the renewed fighting threatens to unleash a humanitarian catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The Syrian civil war has already displaced millions of people, creating one of the worst refugee crises in modern history. Neighboring countries like Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan are struggling to cope with the influx of refugees, their resources stretched thin by the sheer scale of the crisis. Inside Syria, the situation is even more dire. Civilians are caught in the crossfire, subjected to indiscriminate bombing, forced displacement, and widespread human rights abuses. The United Nations estimates that over 13 million people inside Syria are in need of humanitarian assistance, many of them women and children. The recent escalation in fighting has only exacerbated this already dire situation. Hospitals and schools have been bombed, vital infrastructure destroyed, and humanitarian aid convoys targeted. The breakdown of law and order has created a breeding ground for extremism and violence, further endangering civilians. The international community has a moral obligation to act, to provide urgent humanitarian assistance to those in need, and to work towards a political solution that ends the bloodshed. The alternative is unthinkable, a humanitarian catastrophe that will reverberate for generations to come. Chapter 5. The global aftershocks. The potential collapse of the Assad regime is not just a Syrian tragedy, it's a global crisis in the making. The ripple effects of such a seismic event will be felt far beyond Syria's borders, with the potential to destabilize the entire region and reshape the geopolitical landscape. One of the most immediate concerns is the fate of Syria's neighbors. Turkey, already grappling with a large Syrian refugee population, fears a new influx of refugees and the potential for instability to spill over its border. Lebanon, itself facing a severe economic crisis, is ill-equipped to handle another wave of refugees. The potential for regional conflict is also a major concern. A power vacuum in Syria could embolden groups like ISIS, which, though territorially defeated, remains a potent threat. The Kurdish question also looms large, as the SDF's aspirations for autonomy risk further inflaming tensions with Turkey. On the international stage, the collapse of the Assad regime could lead to a new era of great power competition. Russia, having invested heavily in propping up Assad, is unlikely to relinquish its influence easily. The United States, though wary of deeper involvement, cannot afford to ignore the potential for chaos and instability in such a strategically important region. The stakes could not be higher. The world is watching, waiting to see how the events in Syria will unfold. The choices made in the coming days and weeks will have profound consequences, not just for Syria, but for the entire international community. The unfinished chapter. The situation in Syria is incredibly fluid, a complex and ever-shifting kaleidoscope of competing interests and potential consequences. Predicting the future is a fool's errand, but one thing is certain: the road ahead will be fraught with peril. The potential collapse of the Assad regime represents a pivotal moment, not just for Syria, but for the entire world. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict, the fragility of peace, and the interconnectedness of our world. The choices made in the coming days and weeks will have far-reaching implications, shaping the destiny of millions and the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. We can only hope that wisdom and compassion will prevail, that the international community will rise to the challenge and that the Syrian people who have endured so much will finally find peace.